X-Men threats like the Prime Sentinels are certainly unexpected, but they aren't the only X-Men villains out there that might pack a surprising punch. Mr. Sinister was once brilliant scientist and geneticist Dr. Nathaniel Essex. Nathaniel, however, turned to more mad science after the loss of his son, sadly. When offered an opportunity by Apocalypse to become more evolved, Essex ended up taking it. He claimed a new name based off of something his wife had called him upon learning of his true nature: Sinister. Mr. Sinister still seems obsessed with finding a way to fix his long-dead son. Sinister has a particular obsession with the Summers family and even created Madeline Pryor, playing matchmaker to set her up with Cyclops so that the two would marry and produce a perfect mutant child, which Sinister later hoped to procure and study. Sinister also managed to devise a plan that allowed him to completely alter reality, making everything and everyone a part of his own sinister universe in Sins of Sinister. Basically like becoming a god, like becoming ruler of the universe. Now don't get me wrong, I think a lot of folks understand just how deadly this next mutant is, but I'm still not sure if folks see him as a real threat just because of where he's at right now. But a friendly reminder that when Vulcan first turned up in the comics during Deadly Genesis, that is just what he was. Someone who was threatening the X-Men after feeling as though he'd been abandoned by them. Vulcan is the other Summers brother. There is Cyclops, there's Havoc, and of course there is Vulcan, the youngest. Gabriel Summers, however, is maybe the most deadly of these three. Vulcan toiled to seize the Shi'ar Empire for himself after marrying Deathbird. When his father, Corsair, demanded that Vulcan stop his ruthless pursuit of power, by the way, Vulcan responded by killing him. Declaring himself emperor caused a great rift in the Shi'ar Empire, plunging it into a civil war. He also at times has been just generally a kind of awful brother to Havoc. Not cool, Vulcan. Honestly, this next villain is a terrifying one, and one that was kind of short-lived in terms of his appearances when you consider just how horrific he was. We're talking about Gregory Terrariton, aka Slayback. Slayback was a Deadpool villain who also had tanglings with Weapon X and kind of with mutants a little bit as a mercenary. He ended up being hired by a group who was hoping to use Deadpool's healing factor to find a cure for the Legacy virus. Inherently, this doesn't sound super villainous when I say it like that. It's like, well, that would be good, wouldn't it? But at the same time, they weren't doing this out of the kindness of their heart or to just save mutants, but they were simply doing it so they could make a fortune, as once they found the cure, they planned to charge a massive amount for it. Factor 3? That sounds like some kind of toothpaste. This is another villainous team composed of mutants but led by an alien known as Mutant Master. You might not remember it because it was only around for a few issues and also first appeared way early on in X-Men issue number 28 back in 1967. This team popped up a few times and would often force mutants into doing their bidding, often mind-controlling Banshee to attempt to kidnap or help kidnap Professor X. Fortunately, in issue number 39, Factor 3 was defeated for good and hasn't bothered the X-Men since, at least not as far as I know. But were they to come back, who is to say what kind of chaos they could sow? After all, they were a pretty impressive threat when they first showed up on the scene. Ruff House is definitely a lesser known villain, though that doesn't mean we shouldn't be intimidated by him. Although he starts out as a villain in the Wolverine comics and a brute, he later kind of becomes Wolverine's ally after he was sold off by General Coy to be used for experimentation. Pretty messed up. Even Wolverine felt bad for this guy, despite being his rival and his enemy on Madripoor. Wolverine decided to go after him and as such became embroiled in a major political conflict in Tierra Verde, not to be confused with Terra Verde, a different republic that also exists in Marvel Comics. Despite Ruff House saving Wolverine though and becoming temporary allies with him, Ruff House would later go back to being a straight up villain of Logan, even renewing his partnership with Bloodscream, another lesser known villain from the 80s, later on. The Marauders are a team a lot of folks don't think about being a threat, especially not anymore considering we have since redeemed the team name with Kate Pryde's heroic Marauders team. But let's not forget what this team was capable of back in the day and which powerhouse of a mutant brought this team together. It might surprise you to know that Gambit actually created the villainous Marauders team. Of course, he didn't do it because he was truly a villain deep down or anything like that. He basically did it all for Mr. Sinister. Remember when it was revealed that Gambit had a dark secret in the comics and everyone thought it was going to be that he was the witness and the person who ended up betraying the X-Men? It wasn't that. The secret was that he had worked for Mr. Sinister as a retroactive favor after Mr. Sinister had helped Gambit to control his powers by, well, removing a part of his brain. strain. Mr. Sinister had Gambit assemble the Marauders and use them to attack the Morlocks, who he believed were abominations when it came to his pursuit of genetic advancement, resulting in the, as we know it, the Mutant Massacre. And Sinister also had the team hunt down and steal baby Nathan from Madeline Pryor. So they've done some pretty crazy things. Pretty impressive, crazy, villainous things, you know? Unus is of course one of my favorite X-Men villains. I do not think he gets enough love. He is a classic who first appeared on the scene back in the Stan Lee and Jack Kirby days. He was also a villain during the House of M era, though more in the sense that, you know, most mutants were kind of villainous because, you know, they basically were trying to rule the world or were on the verge of ruling the world. Unus the Untouchable is his full mantle, and when we first met him, he was using his mutant powers to cheat in the wrestling ring. Well, I don't know if we can really, you know, call using your mutant abilities cheating per se. I guess in the sense that they weren't being disclosed and that he wasn't wrestling other folks who were on the same level as him, but instead was, you know, wrestling with just regular humans who just had no powers. As you may have guessed, Unus generates basically a powerful force field which he can control that prevents him from being touched. Unus the Untouchable. The first time around, he gave the whole X-Men team major trouble, and it was only thanks to Beast's smarts that they were actually able to defeat him. Beast was able to make it so that Unus could no longer control his powers, so that they were on full force all the time, which also prevented Unus from eating or drinking anything. Needless to say, they wore Unus down and he ended up changing his tune and agreed to stop his villainy. The Blob is a classic villain who I just think does not get enough love for how powerful he is. Honestly, back in the early days of the X-Men, after learning he was a mutant, the Blob almost single-handedly took down the entire X-Men team. They at first attempted to recruit him, and that's when he learned he was a mutant, but after learning of that fact and that his abilities were actually mutant powers, the Blob decided that he didn't actually need the X-Men and that he was actually more powerful than all of them combined and cooler than them. And when they refused to let him leave, since they had revealed their secret identities to him, this was back when the X-Men had secret identities, by the way, and attempted to keep him captive in the X-Mansion, after narrowly escaping, he swore to get revenge on them, and honestly, kind of rightfully so. He returned with the rest of the circus and sideshow performers that he worked with, intimidating the ringleader into even taking orders from him. They returned to the X-Mansion and very nearly ended the X-Men team. The Legacy Virus is one of the most deadly threats we've seen in the comics. We have talked about the Terrigen Mists on part 1, but the Legacy Virus plagued the X-Men and the whole world of mutants after being released accidentally by Mr. Sinister. In fact, Mr. Sinister felt so bad about this, he even tried to work out a cure himself for the virus. As much as he's a villain, Sinister still loves mutant kind and definitely did not want to see them completely wiped out. The virus itself was created by Strife, Cable's evil clone. It only affected those with the mutant X gene. The first time a mutant used their powers after contracting the virus, you would see it activate. This original strain of the virus basically acted like a fast-acting cancer in those who were affected, and we know it as Legacy 1 virus, the first strain of the Legacy virus. And that isn't all. There were actually 2 strains for the Legacy virus, and while the second strain was not as fast acting as the first, I would still argue that it was worse. This strain of the virus was slower acting and would actually cause mutants to lose control of their powers before they die, basically becoming a ticking, superpowered, uncontrollable time bomb. But before this happened, symptoms of those suffering from it would include skin lesions, cough, fever, and autoimmune deficiency, lowering their immune system and making them more vulnerable to other illnesses. So yeah, basically this version of the virus was like the mutant version of our world's AIDS. Pretty terrible. That's about it. I'm your host, Amanda McKnight. Until next time, you stay nerdy, YouTube.